This is Christine Mason Miller. She's an author and an artist. 10 years ago, I religiously read her blog, Swirly Girl, and after she published one of her books, Ordinary Sparkling Moments, she created this little theme of leaving some of her books for random people to find them. When I started the Embrace Project, I remembered this kind gesture and I reached out to her to reciprocate. This is the first time we formally met, and this is our conversation. Oh my God, so nice to meet you, I guess.
Yes, you too. You too.
Well, first of all, I just want to say this is so interesting and strange at the same time, but I really appreciate you taking the time. I know that we all have, some people have more time, other people don't have time. Talking to a complete stranger and answering random questions is probably the last thing on your list. But, I just, I appreciate it. So I just wanted to say thank you. It's not, I'm just sort of fumbling my way through, and my curiosity is guiding me into doing something outside of my norm. And whoever is along for the journey, I'm just really grateful that that's the case. So thank you.
Well, I so appreciate you thinking of me, and I'm happy about it. I mean, it's nice that we're all just trying to figure out a way to make some kind of positive ripple in the midst of all the insanity.
Well, I mean, I would love to know, I've read your blog 10 years ago. You were very sharing and extremely personal in time when this was not normal. Like, this is now the norm.
Right.
And I felt that your language was incredibly authentic, which is the word that I asked you, because now that's just like everybody's, oh, we're looking for authenticity. It was really touching to me, because I feel like a lot of times we're all seeking and fumbling through things and figuring it out, and finding somebody that's going through that and echoing that, like, or just even saying it out and being like, oh, there are more people out there. I've never had that experience, but a complete stranger to really pointedly, specifically say things that I can very much relate to was very powerful for me. So thank you for that. And you were very much existing in that sphere. And when I didn't piece it together until I asked you, what that meant when you said that you sort of kind of pulled back and moved inwards a little bit more. So if you don't mind, this is a very long-winded question, but I would love to know how you go from a sphere of oversharing and over-inclusiveness to a space of pulling back and sort of more inwards. And what does that do for you? And you take it away.
So that is the question that I've been mulling over for the past few days, and I was thinking about how when I started blogging, it was when blogging was just becoming a thing. And that gave me the opportunity to tap into a joy of writing that I had never experienced before. I'd always written in a journal and things like that, but writing on a blog, and I was pretty committed to it. I posted almost every day, and then I was reading other blogs and getting to know other bloggers, and it helped me develop this skill of writing about my life experiences and things I was going through, and wanting to write about them in a way that was ultimately uplifting and inspiring, because that was always what I wanted to do with my work or anything I was putting out in the world. And it helped me find a community. I mean, all of us who were doing that at the time, and at the beginning of that, collectively, we created this amazing online creative community. And I got together with bloggers, and I traveled to visit them, and they traveled to visit me, and we collaborated and had art shows and did all of these things. And then when I published Ordinary Sparkling Moments, that was kind of a physical manifestation of all of those years of blogging and writing and trying to make meaning of everyday life experiences. And now, this was before Facebook, before any of that.
Right.
Now it has gotten so overwhelming to me. I used to be on Facebook and I got off, and I used to be on Twitter and I got off of that, and I'm barely posting anything on Instagram. And there's been something about the experiences that I've had over the past 3 years that have radically, dramatically, seismically changed my life and who I am. And I'm still trying to figure that out, who I am now. I actually started with a new therapist last week, and she gave me some good language around this, which was when I explained all this to her, she said, I'm in a period of disorientation.
Oh.
And I'm like, that is the exact word. That is the exact precise word. So a lot of the things that I was doing for many years and that worked really well for me, they just don't work that well anymore. And that's where I am. And so I just haven't found that path from where I am now and what I'm going through to that idea of sharing it publicly. I haven't figured out a way to do that in a way that feels authentic.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's some part of me that feels like I would somehow be trying to capitalize on these really deeply personal experiences. And that's just my weird thing, I think. I think I'm the oddball in that regard. But until I figure out a way to share about these experiences, I just can't do it right now. It's in those moments. This is the whole thing. It's in the moments when no one's looking. I'm not posting anything. I'm not sharing anything. No one is going to know what I've done this past year. Well, I shouldn't say that. Maybe I'll write a book one day. I mean, right now, no one really, a lot of people don't know what's going on. And there are a lot of things that I've done that, no one will know, and no one's going to acknowledge me, and I don't need that. And
Mm-hmm.
it's in those moments that are hard and I'm challenged and maybe I'd rather not deal with it or whatever, but that's when the real work is done. If I'm not willing to be present and be mindful and be compassionate and be all those things I talk all the time about being, if I'm not doing that in the challenging situations with the challenging people, then it's worthless. You're right. It's a load of crap.
And now it makes sense that you're not as easily available to look at in the social channels. But when I saw that you were working on those postcards, it really piqued my interest, because it almost feels as though it brought me back to sort of where I was reading about you and reading from you, like your, sort of you tapping back into something that was almost like the beginning of your life or professional life. So I would love to know a little bit more about that. We could start with George Floyd cards, if you don't mind.
Sure. It's really interesting the way you explain that, because as I've been thinking about your questions and getting ready for today, it has caused me to look back at how I got started and the path of my career. And I've looked at that before, but you just gave me a slightly different angle to see it. So thank you. I appreciate that.
Yay.
So again, wanting to do something and say something about this horrific event that happened. And sure, I'll sign online petitions and I'll repost things and I'll share things online, and that's great, but that's not enough for me. And this is something tangible, something tactile, something creative, something that it's a physical object that is going to pass from my hands to eventually someone else's hands. And that felt important. And I love snail mail.
Yes.
Did that answer your question?
Absolutely. I mean, I know that you're doing it in batches, and I feel like, you sort of put it out there, if anybody wanted to join you, did people actually sort of wanted to contribute? Did anybody send them their own? Do you know?
A few people did. Yes.
And has anybody acknowledged your mail?
No.
No.
And I have not joined any protests. I've been dealing with some personal situations. So I haven't had the bandwidth for that particular kind of activism. And this is why I figured out to do this. Not that I haven't done anything else, but but I've needed to find a way to contribute to this movement in a way that does allow me to honor what I'm going through right now.
I think it's really nice that sometimes I think people are able to, by doing that and stepping outside of their own personal situations, you are able to reflect and also provide yourself some sense of relief and release. And I think it's a really nice tool because it's genuine and it's loving. It's not like you're trying to piss somebody off. You're just like gently reminding this was a human being and his
Right.
name should
Right.
stay with you. And it's a member, it's a way of remembering, right? It's that vigil. I think saying their name is the idea of a vigil.
Right.
And I value that. So thank you for doing that. You know, you were blogging and you had this very graphic oriented company, but you transitioned into writing, and I'm assuming blogging led into writing, and then you sort of you took it as did you take classes for writing in that time, or you just sort of figured it out on
Oh,
your own?
just one. Just
Just
one.
one.
Yep.
And so, you know, you wrote, is it now 3 books, or there's probably more, but I think I know the 3: the Ordinary Sparkling Moments, your memoir, and then the India, the recent book.
And there's one called Desire to Inspire, where I interviewed 19 other women all about different aspects of creating a meaningful life. That came out after Ordinary Sparkling Moments.
I probably should read that. That seems like really appropriate, but what's going on? Do you think, are you still writing?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
You are. So this is now, it is something that you're fully committed to. This is what you're doing.
Let me rephrase. I'm trying to capture little things right now in my writing, and I'm slowly making my way back toward sitting down in earnest to begin to unpack the past 3 years. And all I've been doing over the past year and a half or so is kind of jotting things down, and every once in a while getting on my computer and hammering something out.
I did want to ask you because when you had mentioned the last book that you were writing, the book about your journey to India, and I was very curious because the subtitle said Finding God, and I was just very curious, like, you know, when you say God, and I read a lot about that concept, and I'm a spiritual person. I'm assuming labels are tough for me, so I try to. But I was just curious, like, what that meant for you. Like, what does getting closer to God like mean?
So I became a Christian in 2017, and it just happened at my dining room table with my husband, and it was like a 10-year journey getting to that point. And it was literally just a decision that I made, and once I made it, I kept getting signs and affirmations that this is the right path. And
may I ask, were you religious before? Were you born in, like, raised in any?
no,
Okay.
no, but always considered myself spiritual and believed in God, but didn't really have any kind of framework, is not the right word, but it never felt as personal as it does now.
Mm.
You know, there was something about that declaration that enabled me to see and realize, oh, God has been like right here with me all along. And it kind of opened my eyes to all the ways God's presence has been in my life and led me to that moment at my dining room table. And it's, to me, it's this very deeply personal relationship. And my husband and I talk about this all the time, and we love C.S. Lewis. And C.S. Lewis wrote a book called Mere Christianity. And what he talks about is this personal relationship. And it's not about you've got to go through this person and that person, and you've got to do A, B, and C in order to get in God's graces and to be okay in God's eyes. Like, there's nothing I can do to be in God's graces. I am in God's graces. God does love me. There's nothing I need to do. Like, that's the point.
Mm-hmm.
That it's not about I need to do this, I need to do that, and then I'll be okay in God's eyes. No, I am, and God is right there with me, accepting me as I am and meeting me where I am, and that's the point. And so
And
it is.
I'm sorry, just a quick question. It
Yeah,
is for the lack of the better word, for you, it is a separate entity.
I
When you
think
say
the
he's
answer
right,
is yes.
okay, okay,
And sometimes she, like
right.
um, but it's God is someone I can turn to, like, in a moment, and feel God's presence. And I just have to remember God's right here. Like, I'm not alone. I'm not alone through anything.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's interesting point considering our when we were talking about and sort of my observation when you're going through something you are experiencing alone, but for you, you have help, or not help, but you have a partner or
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
somebody that's right there with you. Why Christian?
This is just the path I ended up on.
Okay.
Other Christians were coming into my life, and no one ever once was like, you should become a Christian. Like, let me talk to you about that. I think if that had happened, I would have been like, that I would have
Right. Mm-hmm.
distanced myself, just because, you hear a word and it's full of all these ideas,
Of
and,
course.
it's just loaded. But these people just kept coming into my life, and I just kept learning, reading C.S. Lewis and reading the Gospels and meeting these people, and then hearing my husband's story about when he became a Christian and what happened to him after that. And yeah, I mean, both his parents died when he was young. His mom died when he was a baby, and his dad died when he was 13. So then he kind of went off the deep end as a teenager and was doing a bunch of drugs and ran away from home, and, had a really harrowing time. So he stopped doing drugs, but he was still having really bad flashbacks. And again, someone came into his life who was a Christian, who is still in our lives. This is when my husband was a teenager. And one night at his friend's house, he says, okay, I'm all in. Flashbacks stopped immediately.
Interesting. Well,
And that, yeah,
mm-hmm.
go
Go
ahead.
ahead. No, please, please.
I was just going to say, when he told me that story, again, this was after like 10 years of me kind of making my way toward this. After he told me that story, that's when I said, I'm all in.
And how, obviously India is a land of spirituality for everybody. You mentioned India, and I think everybody has their own experience of India. How do those two things converge in a place that has so many different religious and spiritual practices and so many different things? Like, how it feels as though it was heightened and more affirmed, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of the sense that I'm getting.
I went to India in 2014 and then in 2018. And this is how I felt after 2014. And of course, it was just reaffirmed in the second time I went. But the way I describe India to people and why I love it so much is that here's this part of the world where there's so many people and so many cars and trucks and dogs and camels and horses and monkeys, and there's no like straight traffic. Like, it's this whole crazy
Chaos.
dance, chaotic dance of all these living creatures. And somehow, some way, in a way that I think a lot of Westerners can't quite grasp, somehow they're all being provided for. And you just, I feel God's presence so viscerally in India. It's because you think, how could this possibly work? And how could people offer have such lightness in their faces and in their smiles and in the way that they would interact with us? How is that possible? If you describe India and the traffic and the pollution and the noise, and it doesn't make sense. So that, to me, that's God. That's God at work. I know I don't want to over romanticize it, because it's also really hard. It's a really hard play. But again, there's that space where I kind of thrive in those situations. Not always, but here's a really challenging situation for a lot of reasons. How am I going to respond to it? What am I going to notice? What am I going to see? What am I going to take away from this? What am I going to offer to this?
It's
That
interesting.
I
Yeah.
love about India.
But I have one question, and I'm not sure if you're able to. I know it's a hard thing to describe, but I want to know, when you say that you feel God's presence, can you describe that more? Like, I'm very curious if you're, and I know that a lot of times when people say you're not able to put this into words, I would just love for you to try and bring that closer to me, if you could.
So good. There's something about just being with what is. Like, this is what's happening. I'm seeing things that are hard to see, and I'm being, my senses are being assaulted in certain ways that are hard to absorb. And there's something about that, there's nowhere to go. There's no running away or trying to hide. I mean, you could try to hide from what's happening. You totally could, I suppose, in some way or another, but I think it's about those invitations to be so fully in whatever experience is happening, and being able to see that as an opportunity to see something beautiful, and to, again, not to romanticize it, and not to, I'm going to look away from this thing that I think is quote unquote not beautiful, but to find beauty in something that maybe is disturbing. Like in Varanasi, there's one particular, you're on the Ganges and you're going down the Ganges, and there's one particular, they're called ghats, these stairways. And one of them is where they burn the bodies. And it's happening 24 hours a day, all day, every day. And it's so beautiful and so disturbing. But it's like, this is life. This is what happens. And this is how this particular part of the world honors their dead. And this is what they do. And these are their rituals. And this is what it means. And I think it's something about that. It's that this is humanity, and we're messy, and we're all different, and we all have our own ways of doing and being and moving through the world. And God is just providing an opportunity for us to experience each other and experience so much of what this world and this life has to offer.
So I offered into the world the Embrace project, and what I'm getting in return are beautiful new friendships and beautiful conversations that are bringing me closer to people that I know, as well as people that I don't know. And I hope that each one of us takes a moment to connect with what's important in their lives now and beyond.